What if everything you thought you knew about ancient history was incomplete? Picture this: beneath the very ground we walk on, hidden from sight and largely forgotten by time, lie vast storehouses of human knowledge. These are not merely collections of old scrolls or crumbling tablets, but entire libraries, carefully sealed away by civilizations long gone, preserving their most precious writings, their deepest beliefs, and their untold stories. For centuries, these subterranean archives have remained undisturbed, waiting patiently for the right moment to speak to us across the ages. They hold within them the power to fundamentally reshape our understanding of who we were, and by extension, who we are. Think about the last time you walked through an old city or even a quiet field. The earth beneath your feet has witnessed millennia of human triumph, tragedy, creation, and loss. And in some of those places, just out of reach, entire repositories of wisdom are concealed. These hidden libraries were often born from necessity, a desperate attempt to protect irreplaceable knowledge from the ravages of war, the fury of nature, or the slow erosion of time. They are time capsules in the truest sense, safeguarding not just words, but the very soul of a culture. From the dry deserts of Egypt to the volcanic slopes of Italy, these caches have survived against all odds, and their gradual rediscovery is one of the most thrilling narratives in modern archaeology. In this video, we're embarking on a journey to uncover these forgotten libraries beneath the earth. We'll explore how a shepherd's stray goat, a farmer's shovel, or an archaeologist's careful brush has led to discoveries that force us to rewrite entire chapters of early history. We'll see how a single carbonized scroll can overturn philosophical traditions, and how a jar full of manuscripts can challenge religious doctrines held for centuries. This is a story about the resilience of human ideas and the enduring desire to be remembered. It's a deep dive into the shadows of the past, and we're just beginning to understand the light these findings can shed on our shared story. So let's begin. But what drives a society to take its most precious knowledge and literally bury it in the earth? This wasn't an act of abandonment, but one of profound hope. Across continents and centuries, a shared impulse emerged to protect the very essence of a culture from the existential threats looming above. Think of the immense vulnerability of ancient civilizations. A single invading army could torch a city, and with it, 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom stored in a temple's archives. A volcanic eruption could smother an entire region in ash, freezing it in a single, catastrophic moment. Or a shift in religious or political power could lead to the systematic eradication of any texts deemed heretical or subversive. Faced with these terrifying possibilities, the solution was to create a sanctuary, a place where words could outlast the people who wrote them. The ground itself became the ultimate vault, offering a layer of protection that stone walls above the surface simply could not guarantee. This drive to preserve went far beyond simple panic. These repositories were feats of deliberate engineering, designed with a sophisticated understanding of environmental science long before the term even existed. The architects of these hidden libraries weren't just hiding scrolls, they were creating time machines. They selected sites, deep caves, sealed chambers, dry desert tombs, that naturally maintained a stable, cool temperature and consistent, low humidity. These are the exact conditions modern museums spend fortunes to replicate with complex climate control systems. In the arid deserts of Egypt, the lack of moisture prevented papyrus from rotting and ink from fading. In the sealed caves along the Silk Road, the stagnant, dry air could preserve organic materials like silk and paper for a millennium. This wasn't luck, it was intentional. They were building for a future they would never see, trusting that the earth itself would be the best custodian for their legacy. This act, then, transforms these spaces from mere storage rooms into something far more powerful: cultural time capsules. When we unearth them today, we aren't just finding books. We are receiving a message carefully packaged and sent across time. We get the complete, unedited version of a civilization, not the one filtered through later historians who might have had their own biases or agendas. We get their literature, their legal disputes, their grocery lists, their prayers, and their personal letters. This provides an intimacy and an authenticity that is utterly unique. It's the difference between reading a summary of a speech and hearing the actual voice of the speaker. The decision to inter this knowledge speaks to a universal human yearning, the desire to be remembered, to have our stories and our struggles mean something to someone someday. It is a profound act of faith in the future. Understanding this powerful why completely changes how we view these discoveries. It's not just about the content of the texts themselves, though that is often revolutionary. It's about recognizing the immense value these cultures placed on their own intellectual and artistic achievements. They saw their knowledge as worth saving at all costs, even if it meant consigning it to darkness for centuries. This realization adds a layer of urgency to modern archaeological work. These sites are incredibly fragile. Exposure to light, air, or even a change in humidity after centuries of stable isolation can cause them to crumble to dust in moments. Every careful excavation is a race against time to honor that ancient act of faith, to finally receive the message that was so carefully and desperately preserved for us. The very existence of these libraries is a testament to the fact that even in the face of collapse, the human spirit's last act is often to try and save what it knows to be beautiful and true. Now, let's turn our attention to some of the most breathtaking examples of these hidden archives, starting with a discovery that rewrote the history of the Silk Road. In the year 1900, a Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu was clearing sand from a cave in the Mogao grottos near Dunhuang, China, when he made an astonishing find. Behind a false wall in what is now known as Cave 17, he stumbled upon a small chamber packed floor to ceiling with an unimaginable treasure. This was not gold or jewels, but something far more precious. A hoard of approximately 50,000 manuscripts, silk paintings, and textiles, all meticulously sealed away around the year 1000. This was the Dunhuang Library, a time capsule preserving a millennium of cultural exchange along the Silk Road. The contents were staggering in their diversity, featuring texts in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and even Hebrew, covering Buddhism, Taoism, Nestorian Christianity, and Manichaeism. There were star charts, legal contracts, poetry, and even a detailed report on the local diet. This single hidden room offered a panoramic view of a cosmopolitan world where ideas, religions, and goods flowed freely between East and West, completely transforming our understanding of medieval Central Asia. Across the globe and centuries earlier, another library was meeting a very different fate, preserved not by deliberate concealment but by a cataclysmic natural disaster. In 79 AD, the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum under layers of superheated ash and volcanic mud. In the lavish seafront villa believed to belong to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, an entire library of precious Greek philosophical texts was carbonized by the pyroclastic flows. The Villa of the Papyri, as it is now known, contained over 1,800 scrolls, most of them works by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus. For centuries, these scrolls were thought to be irrecoverable, their contents locked inside lumps of carbonized ash that would crumble at the slightest touch. But today, with the aid of advanced imaging technology like X-ray phase contrast tomography, scientists are virtually unrolling these ancient scrolls without even touching them, slowly deciphering lost works of philosophy that haven't been read in nearly 2,000 years. Each successful scan is like receiving a new letter from the ancient world, offering fresh insights into the intellectual life of the Roman elite. Meanwhile, in the 1940s, two separate and seemingly chance discoveries in Egypt would send shockwaves through the world of religious studies. The first began in 1945, when a group of farmers digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi unearthed a large clay jar. Inside, they found 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 ancient texts. These were not Orthodox Christian writings, but Gnostic Gospels texts like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Truth, that presented a radically different vision of Christianity, one that emphasized secret knowledge and personal spiritual enlightenment over faith and dogma. These texts had been largely suppressed and lost to history, and their rediscovery revealed the incredible diversity of belief in the early Christian movement, challenging the notion of a single, unified doctrine from the very beginning. Just a year earlier, and about 250 miles away, another young Bedouin shepherd had thrown a rock into a cave while searching for a lost goat near the Dead Sea. The sound of shattering pottery drew him inside, where he discovered the first of what would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden in 11 caves around Qumran, these 900 manuscripts include the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible, some dating back to the 3rd century BC. Alongside biblical books were previously unknown psalms, commentary, and rules for a mysterious Jewish sect, likely the Essenes. The scrolls demonstrated that the biblical text was still fluid in the centuries around the turn of the millennium, showing variants and versions that differ from the later, standardized Masoretic text. For scholars, it was like being given a direct line to the religious and social turmoil of Judea during the Second Temple period, a time that saw the birth of both rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. Each of these sites, from the desert caves to the volcanic mud, offers a uniquely preserved snapshot, a moment frozen in time that allows us to peer directly into the daily concerns, spiritual longings, and intellectual passions of people separated from us by vast stretches of time. So how do we actually go about finding these incredible time capsules without destroying them in the process? The romantic image of an archaeologist with a brush and a trowel is only a tiny part of the story. Today, the hunt for these subterranean libraries is a high-tech operation that often begins long before anyone sets foot on a potential site. Think of it like a medical scan for the planet. Technologies like ground-penetrating radar send pulses of energy into the earth and read the signals that bounce back, allowing researchers to map out anomalies, voids, walls, or chambers hidden deep beneath the surface without ever breaking ground. Similarly, LiDAR, which uses laser pulses from an aircraft, can strip away dense forest canopy or sand dunes to reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient settlements and potential entry points to underground networks. This non-invasive approach is absolutely crucial. It allows teams to pinpoint the most promising locations with scientific precision, dramatically reducing the risk of damaging something priceless with a misplaced excavation trench. It's the difference between blindly searching a dark room and having a detailed floor plan and a flashlight, but knowing where to look is only the first and perhaps the easiest step. The real challenge begins the moment a potential archive is identified. This is where meticulous, painstaking methodology takes over. The environment that preserved these materials for centuries, the stable, sealed, often oxygen-deprived conditions, is their greatest protector. The single most dangerous moment in an ancient scroll's life is the instant we expose it to our modern world of light, fluctuating humidity, and oxygen. Archaeologists therefore often work in conditions that look more like a laboratory or a surgery than a traditional dig. They might erect tents to control sunlight and dust, or use portable humidifiers to slowly acclimate the air. The extraction of a single fragment can take hours. Tools aren't just trowels and shovels, they are dental picks, fine brushes, and specially designed supports to lift a fragile piece of parchment without it curling or disintegrating from its own weight. In the case of something like the carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum, which are as fragile as charcoal, the entire block of surrounding earth might be removed and transported to a dedicated lab facility to be excavated under a microscope. Every movement is calculated, every breath considered. The goal is not just to get the object out, but to preserve every single speck of context: the pollen grains, the insect remains, the order of the pages, all of which are silent data points telling their own part of the story. This is why no single expert can do this alone. The moment an artifact is recovered, a whole new team springs into action, making modern archaeology a profoundly collaborative endeavor. Conservators, the emergency doctors of ancient objects, immediately work to stabilize the finds. They might gently clean centuries of grime, use chemicals to neutralize acidic compounds that cause decay, or create custom cradles and cases for storage. Chemists analyze the composition of inks and pigments, which can tell us about trade routes and manufacturing techniques, while also helping to date the materials. And perhaps most excitingly, digital specialists now play a pivotal role. Using multi-spectral imaging, they can often see writing that has been completely erased or faded to the naked eye. They can create high-resolution, three-dimensional digital models of an object, allowing scholars from across the globe to study it simultaneously without ever touching the original. This interdisciplinary web of expertise transforms a recovered object from a silent relic into a multi-layered historical document. The physical thing is preserved, but the information trapped within it is unleashed for the entire world to access and interpret. Ultimately, these advanced techniques represent a fundamental shift in philosophy. We are no longer just treasure hunters seeking impressive museum pieces. The true treasure is the information. The goal is to maximize every single byte of data that can be extracted from these fragile finds, understanding that the physical object itself is only one part of the puzzle. By using technology to see without touching, by handling with unimaginable care, and by bringing together a chorus of scientific voices, we ensure that these ancient acts of preservation are finally honored. We are not just digging up the past, we are respectfully listening to it, using every tool at our disposal to ensure its message is heard in its entirety, exactly as its creators intended it to be saved for the future. Imagine the moment of discovery. After centuries in darkness, a fragile scroll or a clay tablet is finally lifted into the light. But the excitement is quickly tempered by a daunting reality. The text is a complete mystery. The script is unfamiliar, the language long since fallen silent. These ancient pages hold stories, laws, and songs, but they are locked behind a barrier more impenetrable than any stone wall. A forgotten language. This is the monumental task of decipherment, a discipline that is part cryptography, part linguistics, and part pure intellectual detective work. It requires a unique blend of logical rigor and creative intuition, where a single wrong assumption can lead a researcher down a years-long path to a dead end. The process begins not with reading, but with pattern recognition. The first step is often to simply count. How many distinct characters are there? A small number might suggest an alphabet, where each symbol represents a sound. A very large number points to a logographic system like Chinese, where a single character can represent an entire word or concept. Something in between could be a syllabary, where each sign stands for a syllable. This initial analysis gives decipherers their first crucial clues about the nature of the code they are trying to break. The history of decipherment is filled with stories of brilliant, obsessive minds who dedicated their lives to cracking these ancient codes. The most famous example is, of course, the Rosetta Stone. Discovered in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt, this dark slab of granodiorite became the key to unlocking hieroglyphs because it presented the same decree in 3 scripts: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek. The Greek was easily readable, providing a known quantity to work from, but it wasn't a simple matter of substitution. For decades, scholars struggled, mistakenly believing the hieroglyphs were purely symbolic. The breakthrough came from Jean-François Champollion, a French philologist who had a profound knowledge of Coptic, the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language. He theorized that the Egyptian script was a complex mixture of logographic and phonetic signs. His eureka moment arrived when he realized that the cartouche, an oval loop enclosing characters, spelled out the names of foreign rulers like Ptolemy and Cleopatra phonetically. By matching the sounds of the Greek names to the Egyptian symbols, he began to reconstruct the phonetic values of hieroglyphs, effectively giving the ancient Egyptians a voice after nearly 2,000 years of silence. A century later, a similar drama played out with a very different script, Linear B, a mysterious writing system found on clay tablets at Knossos in Crete and Pylos on the Greek mainland, baffled experts for decades. Many believed it recorded a lost Minoan language unrelated to any known tongue. The puzzle was solved not by a seasoned professor, but by a brilliant amateur, an architect named Michael Ventris. He approached the problem with a methodical, almost architectural precision, creating vast grids to cross-reference the frequency and position of symbols. Ventris started with a key assumption that the repeated groups of signs in certain table positions might be the names of places on Crete. He then made a daring leap, hypothesizing that the language behind the script might be an early form of Greek, a theory most scholars at the time rejected. He tested his theory by plugging tentative sound values into the grid. To his and the world's astonishment, the tablets began to yield coherent words, place names like Ko-no, so for Knossos, and Amai, Nai, so for Amnizos, and everyday nouns like Tai-rai, Po for tripod, a 3-legged pot. Ventris's decipherment in 1952 was a revolution, proving that Greek-speaking Mycenaeans had ruled Knossos centuries earlier than previously thought, dramatically rewriting the early history of Greece. Today, the solitary genius toiling for decades is being joined by a powerful new partner, artificial intelligence. The challenges are evolving. We now have massive collections of texts, like the hundreds of thousands of fragments from the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, or the still undeciphered scripts like Linear from Crete or the Indus Valley script. The human brain is exceptional at pattern recognition, but it can be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data. This is where computational linguistics and machine learning step in. Algorithms can analyze thousands of inscriptions in seconds, mapping the probability of certain characters appearing next to each other, or identifying subtle patterns of syntax that a human eye might miss. For the Herculaneum Papyri, AI is being used to virtually unwrap the carbonized scrolls, and then, even more impressively, to distinguish the carbon-based ink from the carbon-based papyrus, a task impossible for the human eye, by detecting minute changes in the texture of the rolled surface. These tools don't replace the linguist, they augment them, handling the brute force data analysis to allow the human researchers to focus on higher-level interpretation and cultural context. The ultimate goal of all this painstaking work is not just to create a translation dictionary. It is to perform the closest thing we have to time travel, to hear the authentic voices of the past directly, without a filter. When a script is deciphered, it does more than just provide historical facts. It reveals the humor in a hastily scrawled joke on a Roman pottery shard, the anxiety in a letter home from an Egyptian soldier, the precision of a Babylonian astronomer's calculations, or the profound doubt in a Gnostic gospel. It transforms abstract civilizations into collections of real, thinking, feeling people with complex lives. Each successful decipherment is a bridge built across the abyss of time, allowing for a genuine conversation with our ancestors. We move from simply knowing about them to, in a very real sense, beginning to understand them, their worldviews, their worries, and their wonders laid bare in their own words for the first time in millennia. While the ingenuity of ancient architects and the sheer luck of discovery play their part, there is another, far more silent and powerful partner in the preservation of these libraries, the earth itself. The very ground that conceals these treasures often acts as a perfect natural conservator, and the long-term survival of organic materials like papyrus, parchment, and ink is almost entirely dictated by the specific climate and geography of their hiding place. It's a fascinating dance between human intention and environmental accident. An archive could be meticulously sealed in a beautifully constructed chamber, but if the local environment is humid and fluctuating, it could still be reduced to pulp within a few centuries. Conversely, a collection hastily shoved into a desert cave as invaders approached could remain perfectly legible for thousands of years, preserved by the very air itself. The most famous and effective preservative is, without a doubt, extreme aridity. The hot, dry deserts of Egypt, the high, cold deserts of Tibet, and the rain-shadowed valleys of the Dead Sea create what are essentially natural dehydration chambers. In these environments, the two great enemies of organic material, moisture, and the microorganisms that thrive in it, are almost completely absent. Papyrus, made from the pith of a water plant, is incredibly vulnerable to rot in a damp climate. But in the bone-dry sand of Egypt, it can become as crisp and stable as modern paper. The ink, often carbon-based soot or iron gall, doesn't run or fade. This is why we have such an astounding wealth of papyri from Egypt, not just from hidden libraries but from ancient garbage dumps like at Oxyrhynchus, where even discarded personal letters and shopping lists survived for 2 millennia. The desert doesn't actively preserve, it simply stops the natural processes of decay in their tracks, placing everything in a state of suspended animation. On the opposite end of the spectrum, but equally effective, are environments that are not dry but are instead starved of oxygen. This is the principle behind anaerobic preservation. When organic materials are buried in deep mud, peat bogs, or sealed under volcanic ash, they are cut off from the oxygen that most decay-causing bacteria need to survive. A fantastic example is the waterlogged ground at the Roman fort of Vinderlander in northern England. Here, hundreds of wooden writing tablets were preserved in the wet, muddy soil. The constant moisture actually prevented the wood from drying out and cracking, and the lack of oxygen inhibited bacterial growth. The result, we have an incredibly personal collection of ink-written documents, including birthday party invitations and requests for more beer, that give us a direct line to the voices of Roman soldiers stationed at the edge of the empire. Similarly, the volcanic ash that buried the villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum carbonized the scrolls, but it also hermetically sealed them, protecting them from the elements until their modern rediscovery. This starkly contrasts with the fate of libraries in more temperate or tropical climates, where consistent moisture, warm temperatures, and abundant insect life create a perfect storm for destruction. Imagine the vast royal archives of ancient kingdoms in places like Southeast Asia or Mesoamerica. We know they existed from other historical records. They were described as magnificent repositories of knowledge on bark cloth, palm leaves, and animal skins. Yet almost nothing physical remains. The humid air, seasonal rains, and voracious termites would have made short work of these materials within a few generations. This immense loss is a sobering reminder of how much history has simply returned to the earth, leaving behind only whispers and gaps. When a text does miraculously survive in such a hostile environment, like a medieval parchment manuscript in a damp European monastery, it's often because it was kept in a specially designed chest or a room with unusually good air circulation, a testament to constant, careful human intervention against the overwhelming odds presented by the local climate. For modern archaeologists, this understanding of environmental science is no longer just academic. It's a practical treasure map. By studying climate data and geological surveys, they can prioritize regions where the conditions for natural preservation are optimal. They know to look for sites in hyper-arid zones, near ancient water sources that would have attracted settlement, or in areas with a history of volcanic activity or waterlogging. This knowledge also directly informs the race against time that begins the moment an artifact is exposed. A wooden tablet from a bog must be kept wet and slowly treated with preservatives like PG to replace the water in its cells without it collapsing. A papyrus from the desert must be humidified slowly to regain flexibility without encouraging mold. The earth held these objects in a perfect, stable equilibrium for centuries, and the greatest challenge of conservation is to replicate that delicate balance in a modern museum setting, ensuring that these messages from the past don't vanish the moment they finally see the light of day. This process of unearthing and deciphering is only the beginning. The true earthquake occurs when scholars finally read these long-lost words and realize they are holding evidence that directly challenges the stories we've told ourselves for centuries. History, after all, is not a fixed monument but a constantly evolving conversation, and nothing fuels that conversation more powerfully than a new primary source speaking from the grave. These underground libraries don't just add footnotes to our history books, they often rip out entire chapters and demand we write new ones. They reveal that what we considered settled fact was frequently just the version of events that happened to survive, often written by the winners, the powerful, or the orthodox. The voices from these hidden archives are the dissidents, the mystics, the everyday people, and the rival scholars whose perspectives were marginalized, suppressed, or simply forgotten, and their re-emergence forces a dramatic and necessary reckoning. Consider the monumental impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls on the field of biblical studies. Before their discovery, the oldest known complete Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible dated to the Middle Ages around the 10th century. Scholars had to assume that nearly 1,000 years of copying by scribes had been executed with near-perfect accuracy. The scrolls, some dating back to the 3rd century before the Common Era, pushed that timeline back by a full millennium. And what they revealed was astonishing. While they largely confirmed the remarkable consistency of the Masoretic text tradition, they also contained significant variations, different wording, omitted verses, and entirely additional passages. They proved that the biblical text was not a single, monolithic entity in the centuries around the turn of the millennium, but was still somewhat fluid, with multiple versions circulating simultaneously. Even more provocatively, the scrolls included books that were never incorporated into the official Hebrew canon, like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, works bursting with apocalyptic visions and complex angelology. This evidence forced a profound shift, demonstrating that Second Temple Judaism was a period of incredible theological diversity and ferment, a vibrant marketplace of ideas from which both rabbinic Judaism and Christianity eventually emerged. The scrolls didn't destroy faith, they enriched our understanding of its complicated origins. A similar theological upheaval erupted from the sands of Egypt with the Nag Hammadi Codices. For centuries, our understanding of early Christianity was shaped almost entirely by the writings that made it into the New Testament and the works of the Church Fathers who argued for their orthodoxy. The Nag Hammadi library, hidden away by someone who likely saw these texts as precious but threatened, presented a completely different Christianity. These Gnostic Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, propose a path to salvation not through faith in Christ's death and resurrection, but through a secret knowledge or gnosis of one's own divine spark. In these texts, Jesus is less a savior who dies for sins and more a spiritual guide who reveals the hidden truth about the universe and the self, the provocative ideas within, like a creator God who is flawed and distinct from the supreme God, or the potential for direct mystical union with the divine, were considered heretical by the emerging institutional church. Finding these works didn't mean they were right and orthodoxy was wrong. Rather, it proved that what we call Christianity today was just one strand of a much broader and more fascinating tapestry of belief, and that the process of defining orthodoxy was a fierce, contentious battle of ideas that could have easily gone another way. The challenge to our historical narrative isn't confined to religion. Administrative and scientific records from Mesopotamia have repeatedly forced us to push back the timeline of human achievement. For generations, the origins of complex astronomy were credited to the Greeks. Then, we deciphered cuneiform tablets from sites like Nineveh and Babylon. These weren't hidden libraries in the traditional sense, but they were buried and forgotten archives, often preserved because they were written on virtually indestructible clay. They reveal that Babylonian astronomers, centuries before the Greeks, were not just stargazers but meticulous mathematicians. They developed advanced techniques for predicting planetary movements, lunar eclipses, and the cycles of Venus with astonishing accuracy. They created star catalogs and complex mathematical models based on centuries of observed data. This was a true science, driven by a belief that understanding the orderly heavens was key to understanding the will of the gods and the fate of the kingdom. This discovery didn't just add an earlier chapter to the history of science, it completely reoriented it, showing that the roots of Western astronomy and mathematics lie not in Athens, but in the ancient cities of Iraq. This pattern repeats itself across the globe and throughout time. Every time a sealed jar is cracked open or a carbonized scroll is virtually unfurled, we are confronted with the humbling reality that our past is far more complex, nuanced, and surprising than we ever imagined. These libraries force us to abandon simplistic narratives of linear progress or cultural superiority. They show us that ancient peoples possessed sophisticated legal systems, profound philosophical insights, and scientific understandings that we are only now rediscovering. They remind us that the loudest voices in any era are not the only ones, and that the true story of humanity is found not just in the official decrees of kings, but in the private letters of merchants, the spiritual manuals of mystics, and the calculations of scribes trying to map the heavens. Each discovery is a lesson in intellectual humility, proving that the most dangerous assumption a historian can make is to believe that the historical record is complete. The true magic of these unearthed libraries lies not in the grand, sweeping narratives they sometimes challenge, but in the intimate, granular details they provide about the mundane and magnificent realities of daily life millennia ago. Official histories carved on triumphal arches and composed in royal courts tell us what kings wanted remembered: their victories, their divine mandates, their larger-than-life exploits. but a tax receipt on a clay tablet, a frantic letter from a garrison commander requesting more supplies, or a scribe's practice sheet filled with doodles. These are the unfiltered, unedited records of a civilization's heartbeat. They allow us to move beyond the abstract concept of the Mycenaean civilization or the Kingdom of Ebla, and instead meet the individuals who lived within them, understanding their worries, their workflows, and their world in stunning, often surprising detail. Take the Linear B tablets from the palaces of Mycenaean Greece, dating to around 1400 to 1200 before the Common Era. Before their decipherment, this era was shrouded in myth and legend, known mostly from the epic poems of Homer written centuries later. The tablets, which were essentially the baked, hardened accounting records of palace bureaucracies preserved only because the fires that destroyed the palaces accidentally fired the clay transform that fog into sharp focus. We learn that the economy was a massive, centralized redistribution system, a Bronze Age command economy. The palace kept meticulous track of everything. We have lists of chariot wheels, of bronze ingots, of sheep and goats and the shepherds responsible for them. We see the rations allotted to female textile workers and their children, and even the names of slaves, many of which are non-Greek, hinting at captives taken from across the Aegean. These are not the stuff of epic poetry. They are the dry, administrative reality of running a complex state. They reveal a society organized for efficiency and control, with a sophisticated scribble class that could track assets across a wide region, proving that the roots of Western bureaucracy and record-keeping are far older than ancient Rome. A similar revelation, but from a different corner of the ancient world, came from the ruins of the city of Ebla in modern-day Syria. In the 1970s, archaeologists uncovered a royal archive containing over 17,000 clay tablets. This discovery was a dual earthquake. First, it revealed the existence of a powerful, previously unknown kingdom that dominated trade routes in the 24th century before the Common Era, a contemporary and rival of early dynastic Egypt and Mesopotamia. Second, and perhaps more astonishingly, the tablets were written in a previously unknown Semitic language, now called Eblate, as well as in Sumerian. The contents were a diplomat's dream and a historian's goldmine. There were extensive treaties and correspondence with other powerful city-states, detailing alliances, marriage agreements, and trade disputes. We learn of Ebla's vast commercial network, dealing in textiles, metals, and luxury goods like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, proving that Bronze Age globalization was already in full swing. The tablets even include multilingual dictionaries, used to train scribes in translating between Sumerian and Eblate, showing a conscious effort at cultural and linguistic exchange. The Ebla archive didn't just add a new kingdom to the map. It filled in the complex political and economic web that connected the entire ancient Near East, demonstrating that these early civilizations were deeply interconnected, not isolated entities. Beyond politics and economics, these records offer priceless glimpses into the social fabric and even the personal beliefs of ordinary people. The Vinderlander Tablets, those thin postcard-sized wooden writing sheets found at a Roman fort in northern England, are a perfect example. In one famous letter, the wife of the commander, Claudia Severa, writes to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina, inviting her to a birthday party. She closes in her own handwriting, a rare personal touch with the words, "I shall expect you, sister." Farewell, sister, my dearest soul. That simple closing, sister, my dearest soul, bridges 2,000 years in an instant, revealing a friendship and a warmth that feels utterly modern and human. Elsewhere, a cavalry decurion named Masclus writes to his commander requesting more beer for his men, a logistical concern that any modern manager would instantly recognize. These aren't the grand histories of Tacitus, they are the text messages of the Roman world, reminding us that the people stationed at the edge of the known world still cared about companionship, celebration, and a decent drink. This wealth of everyday evidence fundamentally reshapes our appreciation for human ingenuity. We see not a slow, linear climb from primitivism to sophistication, but a world where ancient peoples continuously solved complex problems with remarkable creativity. The administrative complexity of Mycenaean Greece, the international diplomacy of Ebla, the logistical networks of the Roman army, all of it speaks to a deep and inherent human capacity for organization, communication, and adaptation. These archives show us that the drive to record, to account, to communicate, and to connect is not a modern invention but a fundamental part of the human story. By preserving the paperwork of daily life, these hidden libraries have given us back the people themselves, not as abstract figures in a history book, but as thinking, feeling, and endlessly resourceful individuals navigating their world, their voices echoing clearly across the centuries. Yet for all the wonder of these discoveries, a profound and necessary conversation has emerged from the dust of these excavations, one that grapples not with ancient scripts, but with modern morality. The act of unearthing a culture's most sacred texts or most personal records is not a neutral scientific exercise. It is an intervention laden with ethical weight, forcing us to question who has the right to tell whose story. The legacy of archaeology is, in many ways, intertwined with the history of colonialism, where artifacts were often treated as trophies to be extracted by Western expeditions and displayed in distant museums, severed from the communities that created them. This historical context casts a long shadow over every new discovery, especially in regions that endured centuries of foreign control. The question of ownership becomes incredibly complex. Is a 2,000-year-old manuscript found within the borders of a modern nation state the property of that state, the cultural heritage of a specific ethnic or religious group that may now be dispersed, or the shared inheritance of all humanity? There are no easy answers, and the debates over repatriation, the return of cultural objects to their countries of origin, are often heated, pitting the ideals of universal access against the demands for restorative justice and cultural sovereignty. This tension extends far beyond legal ownership into the very process of research. There is a growing and vital movement within archaeology arguing that the communities most connected to these finds must be active participants in their study, not merely subjects of it. This means moving beyond a model where foreign experts fly in, conduct their research, and publish their findings in academic journals inaccessible to the local population. True ethical engagement involves collaborative partnerships, training local archaeologists, ensuring research is published in local languages, and, most importantly, consulting with descendant communities about how, or even if, certain materials should be studied or displayed. Some knowledge is considered sacred and not meant for public consumption. For instance, some indigenous communities may view certain rituals or esoteric knowledge recorded in ancient texts as meant only for initiated members. An archaeologist's duty to publish all findings can directly conflict with a community's right to protect its spiritual traditions. Navigating this requires immense humility and a shift from seeing these libraries solely as datasets to be mined to respecting them as living cultural patrimony that still holds deep meaning for people today. Perhaps the most fundamental ethical question, however, is the simplest and most startling. Should we even be digging this up? The romance of discovery often overshadows a stark reality. The moment we break the seal on a time capsule that has been perfectly preserved for a millennium, we become its greatest threat. Exposure to light, oxygen, and fluctuations in humidity can cause inks to fade, parchment to crumble, and pigments to flake away in a matter of minutes. Our very best conservation techniques are often just a delaying action against the inevitable decay that our intrusion has accelerated. This presents a powerful argument for what is known as preservation in situ, leaving the archive undisturbed in the ground until technology advances to a point where we can guarantee no loss of information or material. It's an act of incredible patience and respect, acknowledging that the best custodianship might be to simply leave it be for future generations with better, less invasive tools. The decision to excavate must therefore always be weighed against the very real possibility that in our rush to know, we might forever destroy the very thing we sought to understand. This complex web of ethical considerations of ownership, collaboration, and preservation defines modern archaeological practice. It is no longer enough to be a skilled excavator or a brilliant linguist. Today's researchers must also be diplomats, ethicists, and listeners. The goal is no longer just extraction, but stewardship. It's about ensuring that the incredible privilege of unlocking these ancient libraries is balanced with a profound responsibility to the cultures they represent, both past and present, and a solemn duty to preserve their physical integrity for the countless generations of scholars and citizens who will follow. The greatest discovery we can make is not always a new text, but a better, more respectful way to engage with the past. Yet for all our care, the physical objects unearthed from these hidden libraries remain heartbreakingly fragile. The very act of study, of light falling on a page or a fingertip brushing a 2,000-year-old surface, is an act of incremental destruction. This paradox, that to understand we must ultimately damage her, has driven a revolutionary shift in how we approach these treasures. We are moving from preservation in physical space to preservation in digital space, creating perfect, immortal twins of artifacts that can be studied, shared, and experienced by anyone, anywhere, without ever risking the original. This isn't just about backup copies. It's about fundamentally reimagining access to our shared human heritage, breaking down the walls of elite institutions, and making the most profound discoveries of our age available to a global classroom. The tools enabling this transformation are nothing short of miraculous. It begins with high-resolution scanning, where specialized cameras capture every fiber, every crack, every nuance of an object in staggering detail, creating a digital replica so precise it can reveal more than the human eye can see under a microscope. But the real magic happens with technologies like multispectral imaging. This process involves photographing an object dozens of times, each time bathing it in a different specific wavelength of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. Faded ink that is completely invisible to our eyes might absorb or reflect one of these specific wavelengths in a unique way. By stacking and algorithmically analyzing these dozens of images, scientists can literally make vanished text reappear on a screen, reading words that haven't been seen in centuries. For carbonized scrolls like those from Herculaneum, which are too brittle to even consider unrolling, X-ray phase contrast tomography can peer inside the rolled scroll and detect the minute-raised areas where the carbon-based ink sits on the carbon-based papyrus, a difference thinner than a human hair. These are not just cameras, they are time machines healing the ravages of centuries to restore a lost voice. The power of this approach is best seen in groundbreaking international projects. The Digital Dead Sea Scrolls Initiative, for example, has placed ultra-high-resolution images of every single scroll fragment online, free for anyone to explore. A scholar in Tokyo, a student in Buenos Aires, and a curious history enthusiast in Nairobi now have the same level of access to these world-altering texts as a professor in Jerusalem. They can zoom in on a single character, enhance contrast, and study the handwriting style without the need for a security-cleared appointment and white gloves. Similarly, the ongoing work with the Herculaneum Papyri has seen teams of computer scientists and classicists collaborate to virtually unwrap scrolls, a process that would have been pure fantasy just a decade ago. These projects shatter the old model of knowledge hoarded in a vault, replacing it with a new ethos of radical openness. They foster a kind of crowdsourced scholarship where a breakthrough might come from a computer scientist noticing a pattern a philologist might miss, or an amateur historian making a connection between two fragments that had never been physically brought together. This digital shift does more than just protect the physical object. It actively uncovers new information. When you can manipulate a 3D model of a clay tablet, rotating it and examining it from angles that would be impossible to achieve while holding it carefully in a foam cradle, you might spot a faint inscription on the edge that had previously gone unnoticed. When you can use software to digitally flatten a crumpled papyrus or reassemble the pieces of a broken pot, you reconstruct not just the object, but the context that gives it meaning. This technology is also proving crucial for conservation itself. By creating a perfect digital baseline, conservators can monitor an object over years for the subtlest signs of change or deterioration, intervening at the first sign of trouble rather than waiting for visible damage to occur. The digital copy becomes a medical chart for the artifact, ensuring its physical health for centuries to come. Ultimately, this movement towards virtual access is about more than just preservation. It's about reinvigoration. It ensures that these ancient libraries, once hidden beneath the earth and then hidden away in museum basements, can finally fulfill their original purpose: to share knowledge. They are no longer locked away, becoming instead a living, growing resource that sparks curiosity and learning across the globe. By creating these immortal digital twins, we are not abandoning the physical past. We are giving it a boundless future, ensuring that the wisdom buried by our ancestors for safekeeping can now truly reach everyone forever. Of all the questions these hidden libraries provoke, perhaps the most haunting is simply, why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to take the very essence of a culture's knowledge and deliberately consign it to darkness? The answer is never simple, and scholars have pieced together a fascinating mosaic of motivations, each theory revealing a different facet of the human psyche in the face of existential threat. The most immediate and visceral reason is, of course, protection from imminent danger. Throughout history, the written word has been a primary target for conquering armies and iconoclastic regimes, seen as the soul of a people that must be extinguished to ensure total victory. In these moments of crisis, hiding knowledge becomes an act of defiance, a desperate bet that the invaders will eventually leave and that the culture's heart, beating silently underground, can be recovered and revived. The sealing of the Dunhuang library around the turn of the last millennium perfectly embodies this theory. As the region faced growing political instability and the expansion of Islamic empires, the Buddhist monks at the Mogao caves likely saw the writing on the wall. Fearing a wave of destruction aimed at their sacred texts and icons, they made the monumental decision to wall up their most precious manuscripts and paintings, a time capsule of their faith, hoping against hope that a future generation of the faithful would one day return to reclaim it. But not all concealment was born from such urgent panic. Some was dictated by deep, unwavering religious principle. The Cairo Geniza presents a profoundly different, yet equally powerful motivation. In Jewish law, there is a prohibition against destroying any text that might contain the sacred name of God, a concept known as Shemot, because so many documents, from biblical scrolls to personal letters opening with a blessing, could potentially include the name. They could not simply be thrown away. The solution was the geniza, a storage room or depository, often in a synagogue attic or a buried chamber, where these retired texts were respectfully laid to rest. The geniza in the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Old Cairo accumulated an astonishing 300,000 fragments over nearly 1,000 years, preserving everything from mundane business contracts and shopping lists to priceless works of theology and poetry. This wasn't a secret hidden from enemies. It was a sacred recycling bin, a ritualized act of preservation driven by reverence, not fear. The texts were interred not to be retrieved and read again, but to undergo a dignified decomposition, their sanctity honored even in decay. A third, more pragmatic theory suggests that what we now view as priceless archives were sometimes simply institutional garbage dumps, vast accumulations of material that was no longer useful but wasn't deemed disposable. The most famous example of this is the Oxyrhynchus Papyri in Egypt. This was not a sealed library but an ancient municipal trash heap, where centuries of administrative paperwork, personal correspondence, and outdated literary texts were discarded. The exceptionally dry Egyptian climate acted as a perfect preservative, turning a landfill into a time capsule. In this scenario, there was no grand intention to preserve knowledge for the future. It was simply the result of bureaucratic habit and the sheer volume of paperwork produced by a thriving Roman-Egyptian town. The value we find in it today, the lost poems of Sappho, the fragments of unknown gospels, the details of daily economic life, is a happy accident, a case of modern archaeology finding profound meaning in ancient junk. Beyond the practical and the pious, there is a more mystical possibility: ritual interment. Some scholars propose that certain caches were buried as votive offerings, much like precious objects were dedicated to gods in temples or thrown into sacred springs. In this view, the act of placing knowledge in the earth was a form of communication with the divine or the ancestors, a way of gifting the most valued intellectual achievements of a culture to a higher power. The containers themselves, carefully sealed jars, specially constructed chests, lend credence to this idea, suggesting a ceremonial act rather than a hasty stash. Whether it was to ensure the knowledge was preserved in a spiritual realm or to sanctify a new building or community, this theory frames the hidden library not as a desperate attempt to save something from people, but as a deliberate offering to something beyond them. Ultimately, these varied theories show that a single act burying knowledge can spring from a complex web of human emotions: sheer terror, deep reverence, mundane practicality, and spiritual devotion. The motivation changes how we interpret the contents. A library hidden from an invader tells a story of conflict and resilience. A geniza speaks to the power of daily faith and the sanctity of the written word. A garbage dump offers an unvarnished, democratic snapshot of life, uncurated by any authority. By understanding the why, we do more than just solve a historical puzzle. We connect with the anxieties, the values, and the very soul of the civilization that made the choice to send its most precious words into the dark, trusting that the earth would keep their secrets safe until the world was ready to hear them again. While many hidden libraries were deliberately sealed away, some of the most significant finds owe their survival to pure catastrophe. This is the story of the Library of Ashurbanipal, a collection so vast and comprehensive that its accidental burial created a time capsule of an entire empire's intellectual life. Asherbanipal, who ruled the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 7th century before the Common Era, was a unique figure among ancient conquerors. He was a king of brutal military campaigns, to be sure, expanding his empire's borders with immense violence. But he was also a man possessed by an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He didn't just want to rule the world, he wanted to understand it. To that end, he initiated one of the most ambitious intellectual projects in the ancient world. He sent scribes and scholars to every corner of his vast domain, from Babylon to Egypt, with a singular mission: to collect every written work they could find. They were to borrow, copy, or simply take the literary, scientific, and religious texts of every culture under Assyrian control and bring them all back to the capital city of Nineveh, to his royal palace. This wasn't a casual hobby. It was a systematic, state-sponsored effort to centralize all known knowledge in one place, creating what many consider the first true research library in history. The scale of this collection was staggering. When archaeologists began uncovering its remains in the 1850s, they found room after room filled with the shattered remains of what had once been tens of thousands of clay tablets. The final count exceeded 30,000 individual pieces, and the diversity of subjects was breathtaking. This was not a narrowly focused archive of royal decrees and tax records. It was a universal library. There were detailed omen texts where priests recorded the supposed meanings of everything from eclipses to the entrails of sheep, believing they could predict the future. There were rigorous medical texts listing symptoms and treatments, with surprisingly practical prescriptions alongside more mystical incantations. There were complex mathematical tables for calculating area and interest, legal codes that laid out laws and punishments, and meticulous historical inscriptions detailing the king's military victories. And then there was the literature, myths, hymns, and most famously, the masterpiece we know as the Epic of Gilgamesh. This great library was the beating heart of Assyrian scholarship, a place where scribes were trained, texts were copied and standardized, and the king himself was said to have learned to read and write in multiple languages, a rare skill for any monarch of the age. The survival of this incredible repository was a complete accident of history. Unlike the sealed caves of Dunhuang or the Geniza of Cairo, Asherbanipal never intended for his library to be buried. In 612 before the Common Era, just a few decades after his death, a coalition of the empire's enemies, the Babylonians and Medes, stormed Nineveh. They sacked the magnificent city, setting fire to the royal palace. As the great cedar roof beams of the library chambers burned, they collapsed inward, smashing the neatly organized shelves of tablets and burying everything in a layer of ash and rubble. The intense heat from the fire actually baked the clay tablets, making them even more durable than they had been before. For the next 2,500 years, this immense collection lay hidden under the great mounds that marked the grave of the once proud city, forgotten by the world above. The very violence that destroyed the Assyrian Empire became the unlikely force that preserved its memory, protecting the tablets from weathering, looting, and destruction, sealing them in a protective tomb of destruction. The library's modern rediscovery is a tale of 19th-century archaeological adventure, spearheaded by the intrepid English explorer Austin Henry Layard and his assistant Hormuzd Rassam. Digging into the great mounds of Khaenjik, which local tradition held was the site of ancient Nineveh, they began to unearth room after room filled with these broken clay tablets. They couldn't read a word of the strange, wedge-shaped cuneiform script, but the sheer volume of material was astounding. The tablets were carefully packed into crates and shipped back to the British Museum, where they filled the collections and presented scholars with a monumental challenge. The task of deciphering this mountain of unknown writing fell to a series of brilliant linguists, most notably Sir Henry Rawlinson. The library itself provided the key. Because it was so vast and contained so many copies of the same texts, often with small variations, scholars could begin to compare signs and look for patterns. They had administrative lists, they had bilingual word lists, and they had the epic stories that contained names of kings and places. It was a giant cryptographic puzzle, and the Library of Ashurbanipal provided the pieces. The successful decipherment of Akkadian cuneiform, largely achieved through the study of these tablets, blew open the doors to an entire civilization. For the first time, scholars could read the original version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that contained a flood narrative eerily similar to the biblical account of Noah, demonstrating the deep, shared cultural roots of the ancient Near East. The impact of this single, accidentally preserved library cannot be overstated. It single-handedly transformed the Assyrians from one-dimensional villains in the Bible ruthless conquerors mentioned in the books of Kings and Isaiah into a fully realized, complex civilization. We learned they were not just warriors but sophisticated administrators, avid astronomers, meticulous doctors, and profound storytellers. The library revealed the inner workings of a massive imperial bureaucracy that kept records on everything, the spiritual beliefs that sought to find order in a chaotic universe, and the literary traditions that explored timeless themes of friendship, mortality, and the quest for meaning. It gave us the voice of Asherbanipal himself, who in one famous inscription boasted, "I have read the most intricate scripts in Sumerian and Akkadian, and I have studied the secret knowledge of the scribble art." This library is the ultimate testament to the idea that knowledge is power, and its accidental preservation is one of the greatest gifts the ancient world has ever given to the modern one, offering a complete and uninterrupted conversation with the mind of a long-lost empire. If you want to understand the true, unfiltered rhythm of daily life in the ancient world, you don't look in a royal archive or a temple library, you go to the garbage dump. And there is perhaps no more magnificent, messy, and enlightening trash heap in all of history than the one discovered at Oxyrhynchus, a provincial capital on the Nile about 100 miles south of modern-day Cairo. For over 1,000 years, from the time of Alexander the Great through the Ptolemaic and Roman periods and into the early Byzantine era, the people of this bustling town did what people have always done. They generated paperwork and then they threw it away. They discarded drafts of poems, outdated legal contracts, tax receipts, personal letters, shopping lists, and invitations to parties. But here, in the incredibly dry Egyptian desert, that discarded paper didn't rot away. It was preserved, buried under the sand, creating a sprawling, accidental archive of the mundane and the magnificent, a snapshot of an entire town's existence, frozen in its refuse. The scale of this find is almost impossible to comprehend. Since archaeologists Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt began digging there in 1896, they have recovered over 500,000 individual fragments of papyrus. That's not 500,000, that's 500,000 pieces of paper, and new fragments are still being catalogued today, over a century later. This isn't a curated collection of important state documents. It's the entire raw data set of a functioning society, a chaotic jigsaw puzzle of everyday life spanning centuries. The contents are breathtakingly diverse. You have the high culture, previously lost poems by the legendary Greek poet Sappho, whose works were mostly burned by medieval churches for their passion, and entire plays by Menander, a comic playwright so famous in antiquity, whose works were almost entirely lost until Oxyhynchus started giving them back to us. But you also have the profoundly ordinary. There are tax returns from Roman citizens meticulously listing their property, petitions to local officials complaining about a neighbor's illegally built wall, and contracts for the sale of a donkey. There are letters from homesick soldiers writing to their families, and even exercises from schoolchildren learning their Greek alphabet, their clumsy handwriting still visible after 2 millennia. This is the ancient world without its makeup on, and it is utterly fascinating. What makes the Oxyrhynchus Papyri so uniquely valuable is this democratic cacophony of voices. In most ancient sources, we only hear from elite, educated men, the politicians, the philosophers, the historians. But here, the garbage doesn't discriminate. We hear from women managing their own finances and property, a level of legal autonomy that surprises many. We read letters from ordinary soldiers and farmers, their concerns about money and health instantly relatable across the centuries. We even get glimpses into the lives of slaves. This vast paper trail paints a picture of a vibrant, multicultural society where Greek, Roman, and Egyptian cultures blended together. A single fragment might have a legal document written in formal Latin right next to a private letter in Greek, discussing a transaction with an Egyptian farmer. It reveals the complex, layered identity of a people living under imperial rule, navigating multiple cultural currents in their daily business. The work of understanding this mountain of fragments is a monumental task of modern scholarship that is still very much ongoing. It's a slow, painstaking process of conservation, imaging, and decipherment. Conservators must carefully humidify the brittle, crumpled papyri to flatten them without causing them to disintegrate. Then, using multispectral imaging, photographing them under different wavelengths of light, researchers can often make faded ink, invisible to the naked eye, suddenly leap off the page. The real challenge, however, is the assembly. With 500,000 pieces, many no bigger than a postage stamp, matching them up is a puzzle of epic proportions. For decades, this work was the domain of dedicated classicists in university libraries, but in a brilliant modern twist, the project has embraced citizen science. Through an online initiative called Ancient Lives, anyone with an internet connection can help. The website presents volunteers with images of fragments and a simple tutorial on Greek letters. By clicking on the letters they recognize, these amateur sleuths help transcribe the texts and, even more importantly, help identify joins between fragments based on handwriting style and ink color. It's a powerful democratization of discovery, where a retiree in Ohio or a student in India might be the one to help reunite two pieces of a lost poem that hasn't been read in full since the fall of Rome. And the discoveries keep coming, each one a small revelation. A few years ago, researchers sifting through the collection identified a fragment that turned out to be part of a previously unknown gospel, not included in the New Testament. Another fragment contained what is believed to be the earliest known reference to the Catholic Eucharist outside of the Bible, but often the most moving finds are the simplest. One of the most famous papyri from the collection is a private letter from a young Egyptian boy named Theon, writing to his father. He complains that if his father doesn't take him to Alexandria for a visit, he won't write to him anymore and he won't eat or drink. It's a timeless piece of childish melodrama, a son's attempt to emotionally blackmail his busy parent, and it's so perfectly human that it collapses the 2,000 years between us in an instant. The Oxyrhynchus garbage dump doesn't just give us the history of empires and laws, it gives us the people in all their complexity, ambition, and petty worries, reminding us that the past was never a foreign country, but a place populated by individuals who thought, felt, and wrote things down, hoping someone would listen. Yet the impact of these unearthed voices extends far beyond the dusty shelves of academia, rippling out powerfully into the very fabric of our modern imagination. When a long-lost text is suddenly returned to the world after centuries of silence, it doesn't just join the historical record, it actively begins to converse with the present, challenging our assumptions and seeding entirely new creative and philosophical movements. This is perhaps most vividly seen in the dramatic reappearance of the Nag Hammadi Codices. Before their discovery in 1945, The complex and mystical world of Gnostic Christianity was known primarily through the dismissive and often hostile writings of its orthodox opponents like Irenaeus. The Church Fathers portrayed the Gnostics as dangerous heretics, and for centuries that was the only side of the story we had. The Nag Hammadi library changed everything, handing us their own scriptures directly. We could finally read the Gospel of Thomas with its Jesus who says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you," or the Gospel of Philip, which explores sacred marriage as a path to spiritual unity. This wasn't dry history, it was a spiritual earthquake. The tremors from that earthquake were felt almost immediately in the world of literature and art. The central Gnostic idea that a spark of the divine is trapped within a flawed material world created by a lesser, ignorant deity known as the Demiurge resonated deeply with the postmodern sense of alienation and the search for authentic reality beneath layers of illusion. No author embodied this influence more powerfully than the science fiction visionary Philip K. Dick. His later work, particularly his Volleys trilogy, is a direct and deeply personal engagement with Gnostic thought, transformed through the lens of his own bizarre mystical experiences. In these novels, the protagonist grapples with a universe where the world is a fraud, a sinister simulation, and the goal is to awaken to the true, hidden divine reality behind it. Dick didn't just use Gnosticism as a plot device. He wrestled with it as a potential explanation for the nature of existence itself, demonstrating how an ancient heresy, once unearthed, could provide a startlingly relevant framework for understanding 20th century paranoia and the search for meaning in an increasingly technological and deceptive world. This dialogue with the ancient past isn't confined to the realm of esoteric spirituality. The Epic of Gilgamesh, painstakingly reassembled from the fragments of Asherbanipal's library, offered the world a narrative that predates Homer by well over 1,000 years. Its rediscovery provided a stunning parallel to the biblical flood story in its account of Utnapishtim, forcing a widespread re-evaluation of the origins of these foundational myths. For artists and writers, Gilgamesh's raw, primal journey, his wrestling with the death of his friend Enkidu and his desperate, failed quest for immortality tapped into universal, timeless themes of friendship, loss, and the human condition. Its influence is everywhere. It's in the ambitious scope of modern fantasy literature, which often mirrors its epic structure of a hero's journey. It's in the poignant lyrics of progressive rock bands and the narrative arcs of major films, all drawing on the emotional power of this most ancient of stories. The epic reminds us that the deepest human questions about life, death, and legacy are not new. They are the very questions that the first civilizations etched into clay, and their rediscovery allows us to feel a profound connection to that shared, ancient struggle. This interplay creates a fascinating cultural feedback loop. We are not passive recipients of these ancient ideas. We actively reinterpret them through our modern lens, and in doing so, we create something entirely new. The Gnostic texts and the Epic of Gilgamesh are not read today as they were 2,000 years ago. We filter them through our contemporary concerns about identity, power structures, consciousness, and the environment. A modern reader might see in the Gnostic demiurge a metaphor for oppressive societal systems, or even the potential tyranny of a future artificial intelligence. Gilgamesh's destruction of the cedar forest might be reinterpreted as an early parable about ecological hubris. This is the true, enduring power of these hidden libraries. They are not static relics. They are living, breathing participants in a conversation that spans millennia. They prove that an idea, once committed to writing and preserved by chance or intention, is never truly lost. It only lies dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge and challenge, inspire, and force a new generation to see its own world. and its own place within the long arc of history in a completely different light. For all the sophisticated technology and meticulous planning that defines modern archaeology, some of its most earth-shattering discoveries have come from the simplest of human moments: a boy chasing a runaway animal, a farmer's shovel striking something hard in the earth, a soldier pausing to inspect an unusual cave. This incredible element of chance, of pure serendipity, is one of the most romantic and yet most fraught narratives in the hunt for lost knowledge. It reminds us that history isn't always revealed through careful excavation. Sometimes it literally stumbles into the present, delivered not by a PhD with a trowel, but by the completely unprepared hands of everyday people going about their lives. These accidental discoverers become the unlikely gatekeepers between a hidden past and our modern understanding, and their stories are as much a part of the find as the ancient texts themselves. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is the quintessential example of this beautiful chaos. In the hot, arid landscape of Qumran in 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad ed-Dihib was searching for a lost goat. Hoping the animal might have taken shelter in one of the many caves that pockmark the limestone cliffs, he tossed a rock into a small opening. Instead of hearing the skittering of hooves, he heard the distinct sound of shattering pottery. Curious and perhaps a little apprehensive, he climbed into the cave and found several large clay jars. Inside, he wasn't greeted by treasure in the conventional sense, no gold or jewels, but by bundles of old, leathery scrolls wrapped in linen. He and his cousins had no idea what they had found, initially believing the scrolls might have some minor value as leather for repairing sandals. This casual, almost dismissive beginning for what would become the 20th century's greatest biblical discovery perfectly illustrates how monumental finds can emerge from the most mundane of circumstances. A simple act of retrieving a stray animal unlocked a spiritual and scholarly revolution, all because a thrown rock found its mark. A remarkably similar story played out just a year later and a few hundred miles to the southwest, near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi. Here, the discoverers were not shepherds but fellahin, peasant farmers digging for a soft, nitrate-rich soil called sabak that they used to fertilize their crops. As one of the brothers, Muhammad Ali, was digging at the base of a cliff, his hoe struck something hard and hollow. It was a large, sealed earthenware jar. For a moment, fear gripped the men. They believed such a jar might contain a jinn, a malevolent spirit. After some hesitation, Muhammad Ali mustered his courage and smashed the jar open with his hoe, hoping instead for gold. What tumbled out was a collection of 13 leather-bound codices, ancient books. Disappointed by the lack of immediate monetary reward, he bundled them up and brought them home, where the incredibly fragile pages were reportedly even burned by his mother, who used some of the papyrus to kindle the fire. It's a heart-stopping thought for any historian, imagining priceless Gnostic gospels being casually tossed into a cooking fire, their secrets turning to smoke because their true worth was completely invisible to the people who held them. This gap between discovery and understanding is where the story often turns from one of luck to one of loss. When a find is made by someone outside the archaeological world, the immediate context is almost always lost. There is no grid system, no photography of the find spot, no careful brushing away of soil to note the precise position of every fragment. The focus shifts from preservation to possession, from understanding to potential profit. The Bedouin who found the Dead Sea Scrolls, realizing they might have some value after all, cut them into smaller pieces to maximize the number of items they could sell on the antiquities market. A well-intentioned but devastating act that scholars are still trying to reverse through digital reassembly. The Nag Hammadi codices were broken up, traded, and sold through a shadowy network of dealers. their pages separated and scattered before scholars even knew they existed. This initial period of disarray and dispersal creates a puzzle that is often more difficult to solve than the decipherment of the ancient languages themselves. The physical object is divorced from its story, its companions, and its resting place, leaving historians to forever wonder about the exact circumstances of its burial. Yet, to focus only on the damage is to miss the larger, more humbling point. Without these chance discoveries by amateurs, we might still be completely ignorant of these entire libraries. Professional archaeologists can only dig where they have funding, permits, and a solid scholarly reason to believe something might be found. They operate on a map of known history, slowly expanding its edges. But a farmer digging in his field or a shepherd climbing a cliff is operating off the map entirely. They are exploring the world at a granular, local level that no survey can ever fully replicate. Their discoveries remind the academic world that the past isn't neatly confined to marked sites on a survey. It is everywhere, woven into the very landscape, waiting for a random event to bring it back to the surface. This element of luck injects a necessary dose of humility into the field, proving that the next great revelation might not come from a multi-million-dollar grant project, but from a child playing in a sand dune. This undeniable reality places a profound responsibility on the shoulders of archaeologists and educators today. The romance of the accidental find must be paired with a massive, ongoing public education effort. The goal is to transform the initial reaction from "how much is this worth" to "I need to tell someone about this." Communities that live atop layers of history need to be seen as partners and stewards, not as obstacles or potential looters. Outreach programs that explain the irreplaceable value of context, that show how a potsherd in its original position can tell a more important story than a golden statue in a black market collection, are essential. By fostering a sense of shared cultural heritage and pride, the hope is that the next Muhammad ed-Din Hib, upon hearing the sound of breaking pottery, will immediately seek out the local authorities, becoming not just a discoverer but a true partner in preservation, ensuring that the next great library to emerge from the earth arrives with its story intact. The moment of discovery is perhaps the most dangerous in an ancient object's long life. For centuries, even millennia, these delicate artifacts have existed in a state of perfect equilibrium with their environment, held in a silent, stable embrace by the earth. The air around them hasn't stirred, the temperature has barely fluctuated, and the damaging rays of the sun have been completely absent. But the instant we break that seal, we shatter that delicate balance and introduce a host of new, aggressive threats. The very oxygen we breathe becomes a corrosive agent, initiating chemical reactions that can cause inks to fade and organic materials to deteriorate. A slight change in humidity can make brittle parchment crumble like autumn leaves or cause fungal blooms to erupt on a papyrus surface. Even the energy from standard lighting can accelerate the breakdown of fragile dyes and pigments. The race against time doesn't end with the excavation. In many ways, that's when the real battle for preservation truly begins. A delicate dance between saving the object and accidentally becoming the very cause of its destruction. To combat these invisible enemies, conservators wield an arsenal of highly specialized techniques, each designed to address a specific agent of decay. One of the most common and insidious threats is inherent acidity. Over time, the materials themselves, the paper, the parchment, the inks, can produce acids that slowly eat away at their own fibers, a process often called invisible fire. To stop this, conservators use a process called deacidification, where they carefully treat the object with a mild alkaline solution that neutralizes these acids, and deposits a tiny alkaline buffer within the material to protect it against future acid attack. It's like giving the artifact an internal vaccine against its own decay. For items that are too fragile to handle, like a crumbling scroll or a fragmented letter, encapsulation provides a safe haven. This involves carefully sandwiching the item between two sheets of chemically stable, transparent polyester film, sealed around all edges. This microclimate protects the object from physical handling and pollutants while still allowing it to be viewed and studied from both sides, a perfect marriage of preservation and access. The ultimate defense, however, is a controlled environment. The most valuable artifacts don't reside on open shelves but live in vaults that are essentially intensive care units for historical objects. These are not ordinary rooms, they are technological marvels where temperature and humidity are held within a razor-thin margin of perfection, often around 18 degrees Celsius and 50% relative humidity. The air is constantly filtered to remove dust and gaseous pollutants. Light levels are kept extremely low, with sensitive items often stored in complete darkness and only brought out under special, low-energy lights for brief periods of study. These measures are designed to do one thing: slow down the inevitable processes of decay to an absolute crawl, effectively placing the object back into a state of suspended animation, much like the one it enjoyed underground, but now under our vigilant watch. But preservation isn't just about fighting a defensive battle against decay. It's also about proactive, cutting-edge science that seeks new and better ways to protect our shared heritage. Researchers around the world are experimenting with groundbreaking materials and technologies. Nanotechnology offers the potential for new, super-thin protective coatings that are invisible to the naked eye but provide a powerful barrier against moisture and pollutants. Scientists are also developing advanced imaging techniques that can not only read texts without unrolling them, but also analyze the molecular composition of inks and binding agents at a microscopic level, providing crucial data that can inform new, more effective conservation strategies. This isn't just about maintaining the status quo. It's about continuously pushing the boundaries of what's possible to give these fragile treasures their best chance at surviving for another 1,000 years. No single institution, no matter how well funded, can tackle these global challenges alone. This is why international collaboration is the true backbone of modern conservation efforts. Organizations like the Getty Conservation Institute and the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, or ICROM, function as global hubs of knowledge. They conduct foundational research, develop best practice guidelines, and most importantly, they train conservators from all over the world, ensuring that expertise is shared and not hoarded. A conservator in Cairo can learn the latest techniques for treating water-damaged papyri developed in London, while a specialist in Beijing can share their breakthroughs in silk preservation with colleagues in Italy working on artifacts from Herculaneum. These partnerships create a global network of expertise, ensuring that a priceless manuscript discovered in a remote monastery has access to the same level of care as one in a world-famous museum. This collective effort, this shared commitment to being stewards of the past, is our greatest hope for ensuring that the messages buried by our ancestors, their stories and their wisdom, will continue to speak to all the generations yet to come. To truly understand why these precious libraries were hidden, we must step back from the scrolls and tablets themselves and look at the tumultuous world that surrounded them. These collections were not buried in a vacuum. They were a direct and often desperate response to the seismic political and economic shifts that threatened to erase entire cultures. The act of concealment was a strategic decision made under immense pressure, a cultural triage where the most vital knowledge was prioritized for survival. It forces us to see these archives not just as collections of old texts, but as the intellectual fallout shelters of their age, built to withstand the coming storm. Consider the dramatic story of the Dunhuang library cave, sealed around the turn of the last millennium. This was not a random act by a paranoid monk, but a calculated move against a backdrop of profound geopolitical upheaval. The Silk Road, the lifeblood of Dunhuang's cosmopolitan oasis culture, was becoming increasingly dangerous and unstable. The Tang dynasty's power was waning, and from the west, the expansion of Islamic empires and the conversion of many Turkic peoples created a rising tide of political and religious change that lapped at the gates of Buddhist Central Asia. For the monks at the Mogao caves, their vast collection of manuscripts in Chinese, Tibetan, and Sanskrit represented a flourishing, pluralistic intellectual world. Hiding it was a bet that this world was temporary, a hope that the tide would one day recede and their unique blend of Buddhism, Taoism, and other faiths could be safely recovered. They were protecting their identity from being assimilated or annihilated by the powerful new forces reshaping the region, ensuring that even if their temples fell silent, their wisdom would not be lost forever. On the other side of the world, a very different kind of disaster led to a similar act of preservation, albeit an unintentional one. The Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum offers a stunningly clear snapshot of the political and intellectual climate of the Roman elite in the 1st century. This was a period of immense instability, even before Vesuvius erupted. The reign of Nero was marked by paranoia, purges, and political violence. For a wealthy aristocrat like the villa's owner, believed to be Lucius Calpurnius Piso, a library filled with Greek philosophical texts, particularly those of the Epicurean school, was more than a status symbol. In a time of shifting political allegiances and dangerous imperial whims, philosophy offered a framework for navigating a treacherous world, a guide to finding personal tranquility amid public chaos. The eruption that buried the villa did not discriminate. It froze this very particular moment of anxiety and seeking, preserving not just the texts, but the reason they were so valued in the first place. The library's burial was a direct result of the region's volatile geology, but its content reflects the political insecurity of its owner. Sometimes the pressure was more economic than overtly political. The vast caches of cuneiform tablets found in Mesopotamian cities like Ebla and Mari, while not always hidden in secret chambers, were often systematically archived and then preserved when their palaces were sacked and burned. These were not primarily libraries of literature, but of administration detailed records of trade agreements, tributes paid and received, inventories of goods, and correspondence with rival powers. In an economy built on complex, long-distance trade in metals, textiles, and grain, this information was the state's most valuable asset. It was the equivalent of a modern government's central server, containing all its financial records and diplomatic cables. Destroying these archives in war was a way to cripple a rival's economy and administration, literally erasing their claims to debts and territories. The fact that so many of these tablets survived is only because they were written on clay and then hardened in the very fires meant to destroy them. Their preservation is accidental, but their creation was a meticulous process driven by the need to manage and protect economic power in a fiercely competitive landscape. This context transforms how we read the archives themselves. A dry list of tax receipts isn't just an economic data point. It's evidence of a centralized state exerting control over its resources, often in preparation for or recovery from conflict. A collection of religious texts hidden in a jar speaks to a community under threat, safeguarding the core of its belief system from persecution. A private library of Greek philosophy in an Italian villa reveals an individual's search for meaning in a dangerous political climate. By understanding the storms that swirled around these collections, we stop seeing them as random collections of old paper and clay and start hearing them as the last, desperate messages from cultures in crisis. They are the choices a society makes when it knows its physical existence is threatened, a decision about what is so essential, so fundamental to its identity, that it must be saved at all costs, even if that means entrusting it to the darkness for 1,000 years. The hidden library is the ultimate act of cultural defiance, a declaration that while empires may fall and cities may turn to dust, the ideas they considered most precious have a right to endure. The hunt for these lost libraries is far from over. In many ways, it feels as though we are only just beginning to scratch the surface of a vast and hidden world of knowledge. The future of discovery in this field is being reshaped by a breathtaking convergence of new technologies that are allowing us to see the Earth not as a solid, impenetrable mass, but as a landscape rich with clues and whispers of what lies beneath. The traditional image of an archaeologist surveying a promising mound with nothing but a keen eye and intuition is now powerfully augmented by an array of tools that feel borrowed from science fiction. Satellite imagery and aerial photography, for instance, can reveal subtle variations in soil color and vegetation growth that betray the presence of buried walls or disturbed earth, features completely invisible to anyone standing on the ground. Even more impressive is LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, a technology that uses laser pulses shot from an aircraft to digitally strip away dense forest canopies or layers of sand, creating an incredibly detailed three-dimensional map of the underlying topography. This has been revolutionary in places like the jungles of Central America, where it has revealed vast, sprawling ancient cities that were completely unknown, suggesting that undiscovered archives could be waiting in their ceremonial centers. Drones now buzz over remote sites, capturing high-resolution images from every angle and creating photogrammetric models that are accurate to within millimeters, allowing researchers to monitor site erosion or plan excavations with surgical precision from thousands of miles away. Perhaps the most transformative tool on the horizon is the application of artificial intelligence. The challenge is no longer just finding a potential site, it's processing the unimaginable amount of data these new methods generate. AI algorithms are now being trained to scan this digital landscape, learning to recognize the faint, ghostly signatures of ancient human activity, the rectangular footprint of a building, the straight line of a road, the circular depression of a tomb patterns that might elude even the most experienced human analyst. This is not about replacing archaeologists, but about empowering them to focus their precious time and resources on the most promising targets. Imagine an AI cross-referring geological surveys, historical trade routes, and climatic data to generate a probability map of where a lost monastic library from the Silk Road might most likely be found. This moves the field from one of educated guesswork to one of data-driven prediction, dramatically increasing the odds of a successful and groundbreaking discovery. These technological leaps are turning the entire planet into a vast, readable text, and we are only just learning its grammar. This new wave of exploration is increasingly focused on regions that have been historically understudied or difficult to access. For centuries, the narrative of ancient history has been disproportionately shaped by discoveries in Europe and the Middle East, but the next chapters are likely to be written in the deserts of Central Asia, the highlands of Africa, and the rainforests of South America. Central Asia, the crossroads of the ancient world, is a particularly tantalizing frontier. The Silk Road was not a single path but a sprawling network of routes, dotted with countless forgotten cities, caravanserais, and monastic complexes. Many of these sites, buried by the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert or hidden in the foothills of the Pamir Mountains, could contain archives that illuminate the flow of ideas between East and West in ways we can scarcely imagine. Similarly, Africa, with its incredibly diverse and ancient civilizations beyond Egypt, holds immense potential. The rock-hewn churches of Ethiopia, the lost kingdoms of the Sahel, and the trading ports of the Swahili coast all undoubtedly produced vast written records on materials like parchment, leather, and wood that could have survived in the right conditions. In South America, the focus shifts from written text to other forms of recording knowledge, such as the intricate quipu chord systems of the Inca. But the possibility of finding sealed offering chambers or untouched tombs containing records on preserved textiles or bark paper codices remains a powerful lure for researchers. This globalized effort necessitates a new spirit of international cooperation and a stronger ethical framework. The era of colonial-era treasure hunting, where artifacts were extracted with little regard for their context or cultural significance, is rightly giving way to a model built on partnership and mutual respect. International treaties like the 1970 UNESCO Convention provide a legal framework to combat the illicit antiquities trade and encourage the repatriation of culturally significant objects. More importantly, modern excavations are increasingly collaborative ventures involving local archaeologists as lead researchers, not just as hired labor. This ensures that the knowledge gained from a discovery benefits the community where it was found, fostering cultural pride and creating a new generation of local stewards for their own heritage. The goal is shifting from extraction to understanding, from owning the past to learning from it. This ethical evolution is as crucial as any technological advancement, ensuring that the next great library we find is not just studied, but celebrated as a shared victory for all of humanity, a testament to our collective past and our collaborative future. With every tool at our disposal sharpened and every corner of the globe within reach, the potential for earth-shattering discoveries has never been greater. We stand on the brink of revelations that could fundamentally alter our understanding of human creativity, spirituality, and connection. The next sealed cave or buried villa could contain a lost epic poem that rivals Homer, a scientific treatise that demonstrates a sophistication we never attributed to ancient peoples, or a religious text that presents a completely unknown spiritual tradition. Each new library is a direct challenge to the historical narrative, a reminder that our current understanding is built on a fragment of the evidence that once existed. The story of our past is not a completed book sitting on a shelf. It is a living, breathing document with missing chapters still being found, waiting patiently beneath the soil for the right combination of curiosity, technology, and respect to bring them back into the light and allow their voices to be heard once more. Imagine the foundation of a faith, carefully constructed over centuries from a set of sacred texts believed to be singular, authoritative, and complete. Now imagine that foundation being gently but profoundly shaken by the discovery of ancient voices that tell a different story. This is the seismic impact these forgotten libraries have had on the academic study of religion, transforming it from a discipline that often studied a finished product into one that investigates a dynamic, contentious, and wildly diverse process of becoming. The sealed jars and buried chests didn't just contain old pages, they held counter-narratives, lost gospels, and suppressed prayers that challenged the very idea of a single, unbroken thread of belief stretching back to the beginning. They have forced scholars to trade simple certainties for a much richer, more complex, and far more human history of how our deepest spiritual traditions were actually formed. The most dramatic example of this is without a doubt the Dead Sea Scrolls. For Judaism and Christianity, the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament stands as a cornerstone. Before the discovery of the scrolls in the mid-20th century, the oldest known complete Hebrew manuscripts of these books dated to the Middle Ages, around the 10th century. Scholars had to operate on faith that 1,000 years of copying by scribes had been executed with near-flawless accuracy, preserving the original words of God without corruption. The Dead Sea Scrolls shattered that assumption by providing manuscripts that were a full millennium older. Suddenly, we could compare the medieval text with versions that were circulating in the time of Jesus. The result was both reassuring and revolutionary. While the scrolls confirmed the remarkable overall stability and faithfulness of the scribbled tradition, they also revealed a text that was, in its earlier stages, still somewhat fluid. There were variations in wording, omitted verses, additional lines, and even differences in theological emphasis. Perhaps most startlingly, the scrolls included books that never made it into the official Hebrew canon, like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, works filled with apocalyptic visions and complex angelology. This proved that the biblical canon was not preordained but was the result of lengthy debate and decision-making, and that the Judaism of the Second Temple period was a bubbling cauldron of diverse ideas, a vibrant marketplace of belief from which both modern rabbinic Judaism and Christianity eventually emerged. If the Dead Sea Scrolls complicated the history of the Hebrew Bible, the Nag Hammadi library turned the origins of Christianity on its head. For centuries, our understanding of the early church was shaped almost entirely by the writings that made it into the New Testament and the works of the church fathers who championed them. Figures like Irenaeus actively argued against and condemned rival interpretations, painting a picture of a unified Orthodox movement fighting off a fringe of dangerous heretics. The Nag Hammadi Codices, discovered in 1945, gave those so-called heretics their own voice for the first time. This collection of Gnostic texts presented a Christianity that was utterly different from the one that became dominant. In Gospels like Thomas and Philip, Jesus is less a savior who dies for humanity's sins and more a wisdom teacher who reveals the secret knowledge, or gnosis, that can liberate the divine spark trapped within each person. Salvation comes not from faith in a historical event, but from this inner awakening and understanding. The texts often present a dualistic view of the world, where the material universe is the flawed creation of a lesser, ignorant deity known as the Demiurge, and the true, transcendent God is far beyond it. This was a Christianity that emphasized direct, personal spiritual experience over institutional authority and ritual, and its rediscovery has been nothing short of transformative. It revealed that what we call Christianity today was merely the winning side in a fierce, multifaceted battle of ideas. The early church was not a monolith but a spectrum of beliefs, and the Nag Hammadi library forces us to acknowledge that roads not taken were once vibrant, compelling paths for seeking the divine. Beyond these two famous examples, other finds have added further layers of nuance. The Cairo Geniza, while not a hidden library in the same sense, preserved hundreds of thousands of Jewish manuscript fragments from the medieval period that had been stored away due to a prohibition against destroying texts containing God's name. This treasure trove includes liturgical poetry, mystical texts, and legal rulings that show the incredible diversity of Jewish practice and thought within the medieval Mediterranean world, far beyond the standard narratives. Similarly, the Manichaean texts found along the Silk Road provide a complete picture of a religion that was famously persecuted into extinction, allowing us to understand its complex cosmology and its relationship to both Christianity and Buddhism on its own terms, rather than through the hostile descriptions of its enemies. The collective impact of these discoveries has been to dismantle the simplistic, linear model of religious history, where a pure original faith is founded and then slowly degrades over time, and replace it with a model of constant dialogue, debate, and diversity. Scholars now speak of Judaisms and Christianities in the plural, especially when discussing their formative first centuries. This doesn't devalue modern faith traditions. Instead, it grounds them in a much more realistic and relatable human story. It shows that the development of religion is a process of choices, conversations, and sometimes conflicts, where certain ideas gain traction and others are sidelined for a complex mix of theological, political, and social reasons. These hidden libraries have given back to us a lost world of spiritual exploration, reminding us that the questions of how to connect with the divine, how to live a good life, and how to understand our place in the cosmos have always generated a breathtaking array of answers. By recovering these suppressed voices, we haven't weakened religious history. We have immeasurably enriched it, replacing a clean, simple story with a messy, complicated, and far more truthful one. Unlocking the secrets of a single ancient manuscript is rarely a puzzle that can be solved by one expert working alone. It's more like a symphony, where each instrument plays a critical and distinct part, and only when they all come together does the full, magnificent piece emerge. The study of these forgotten libraries is a profoundly collaborative endeavor, a meeting of minds from fields that, on the surface, might seem to have little in common. An archaeologist's careful brush, a philologist's deep linguistic knowledge, a chemist's precise instruments, and a computer scientist's complex algorithms are all equally vital tools in this shared mission. This isn't just a team effort, it's a complete fusion of disciplines where the traditional boundaries between science and the humanities blur and then vanish entirely, all in service of hearing the whispers of the past. Consider the moment a new fragment is discovered. The archaeologist, with their expertise in stratigraphy and context, can tell us the layer of earth it was found in and what other objects were nearby, providing a crucial relative date. But to get a more precise age, we might turn to a chemist. By analyzing the organic materials, perhaps the parchment itself or the binding glue, using radiocarbon dating, they can provide a startlingly accurate calendar date for when the animal was slaughtered or the plant was harvested. Furthermore, the ink itself holds a chemical fingerprint. By studying its composition, whether it's carbon-based, iron gall, or made from other pigments, chemists can trace the ingredients to specific geographical regions, revealing trade routes and economic networks. They can even detect later additions or forgeries if the chemical signature of the ink doesn't match the proposed date of the text. A geologist, examining the soil samples from the excavation site, can contribute by identifying mineral deposits or pollen grains trapped in the dirt, painting a picture of the ancient climate and environment that surrounded the library when it was sealed. What was the weather like? Was the region lush or arid? This environmental context adds another rich layer to our understanding of why the library was created and what forces it was meant to withstand. Once the physical object is stabilized and understood, the baton passes to the philologists and linguists, the masters of language. Their task is to decipher the script and understand the content, a process that is often like cracking a complex code without a key. They analyze grammar, syntax, and vocabulary, comparing unknown words to known languages to slowly piece together meaning. But here, too, they are no longer working in isolation. Computer scientists have developed powerful algorithms that can process thousands of lines of text in seconds, identifying patterns, frequencies, and correlations that would take a human scholar a lifetime to notice. For texts that are fragmentary, and most are, these algorithms can now suggest probable matches between pieces based on handwriting analysis, word patterns, or the physical tear lines of the papyrus. In the case of the carbonized Herculaneum scrolls, where physical unrolling is impossible, computer-driven X-ray phase contrast tomography, can virtually peer inside the rolled scroll and detect the slight bump of ink on papyrus, allowing the text to be read without ever being touched. This is a perfect example of a problem that was utterly intractable for classicists alone, but is now being solved by applying cutting-edge physics and computer science from a completely different field. This cross-pollination of ideas constantly generates new and unexpected innovations. A technique developed for enhancing satellite imagery might be adapted to sharpen faded ink on a parchment. A statistical model used to predict economic trends could be retooled to identify the authorship of anonymous texts based on writing style. The digital humanities, a field that barely existed a few decades ago, now sits at the very heart of this work, creating immersive virtual reality reconstructions of ancient libraries or building vast online databases that link high-resolution images of artifacts with translations, scholarly commentary, and related finds from across the globe. This interconnected web of knowledge allows a researcher in Brazil to study a manuscript in Berlin as if they were holding it under a microscope, collaborating in real time with a colleague in Tokyo. The synergy created by this interdisciplinary dance does more than just make the work more efficient. It fundamentally transforms the kinds of questions we can ask. We are no longer limited to wondering what a text says. We can now investigate how it was made, where its materials came from, who read it, and even how its ideas traveled and evolved. It is through this collaborative spirit, this respectful conversation between the lab and the library, that these ancient archives finally reveal their fullest, most profound stories. But unearthing these treasures is only half the battle. If these ancient voices are to truly speak to us again, they must be heard not just by a handful of scholars in quiet reading rooms, but by everyone. The incredible stories locked within these fragile pages belong to all of humanity, and finding creative, powerful ways to share them is one of the most important missions of modern archaeology. This is where the sterile world of the conservation lab meets the vibrant energy of public engagement, transforming dusty relics into living, breathing narratives that can captivate, educate, and inspire millions around the globe. Museums have long been the traditional bridge between the ancient past and the curious public, but their approach has undergone a quiet revolution. Gone are the days of simply placing a fragment of parchment in a dimly lit case with a small, typewritten card. Today, institutions are creating immersive, theatrical experiences. Imagine walking into a gallery designed to mimic the cool, echoing silence of the Cave of the Thousand Buddhas in Dunhuang, with high-fidelity replicas of sculptures surrounding you and animated projections bringing the stories from the manuscripts on the walls to life. Or consider the British Library's handling of the Magna Carta, where interactive touchscreens allow you to explore an ultra-high-resolution scan of the document, zooming in on every faded pen stroke and every correction, with pop-up explanations that decode the Latin and explain the historical context of each clause. This isn't just display, it's storytelling on a grand scale, using the artifact as the centerpiece of a much larger narrative that engages the senses and the intellect simultaneously. The digital realm has utterly transformed this landscape, demolishing the physical and financial barriers that once kept these discoveries locked away. The most pioneering work is happening in virtual and augmented reality. Projects now allow you to don a headset and literally step into a three-dimensional reconstruction of the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum before the eruption. You can walk through the lavish gardens, enter the library, and watch as a virtual scroll unrolls before your eyes, its text becoming legible as you lean in closer. Augmented reality apps on your phone can point its camera at a modern-day landscape, like the shores of the Dead Sea, and overlay a reconstruction of the Qumran settlement as it would have looked 2,000 years ago, with tiny figures of scribes at work. This technology does more than just show you an object. It transports you into its world, creating an empathetic connection that a glass case simply cannot achieve. Perhaps the most powerful innovation, however, is the rise of citizen science. Recognizing that the sheer volume of material is too vast for any single team of academics to process, institutions are openly inviting the global public to roll up their sleeves and help. Platforms like Zooniverse host projects like Ancient Lives, where anyone with an internet connection can look at images of papyrus fragments from Oxyrhynchus and be guided through the process of identifying Greek letters. You don't need a PhD, you just need curiosity and a careful eye. This isn't busy work. Volunteers have made genuine, publishable contributions, identifying joins between fragments, transcribing texts, and even helping to spot previously unknown works of literature. This creates a profound sense of ownership and connection. A schoolteacher in Wisconsin or a taxi driver in Mumbai can rightly say, "I helped decipher that text." They become active participants in the research, not passive consumers of its results, fostering a global community of amateur guardians for our collective past. This work of engagement is far from a mere publicity stunt. It is a critical pillar of sustainable archaeology. By sharing these stories widely and excitingly, museums and universities build public support. This translates into visitors, memberships, and crucially, donations that fund the next excavation or the purchase of a new multispectral imaging scanner. More importantly, it cultivates a deeper cultural value for preservation. When people feel a personal connection to these ancient writers, when they've spent an hour trying to decipher their handwriting or have virtually walked through their ruined library, they are far more likely to support laws that protect cultural heritage sites and oppose the illicit antiquities trade that fuels looting. The carefully crafted documentary, the brilliantly designed museum exhibit, and the accessible online transcription tool are not just educational, they are acts of preservation in themselves. They ensure that the wisdom buried by our ancestors, found through a combination of brilliance and luck, and preserved through painstaking science, does not fade back into obscurity, but instead finds a permanent and cherished home in the imagination of the world. For centuries, our view of the ancient world was shaped by the words of victors, kings, and philosophers, almost exclusively elite men, who had the luxury of time, education, and the authority to ensure their stories were the ones that survived. This created a historical record that was not just incomplete, but profoundly skewed, presenting a top-down narrative where the vast majority of the population were little more than silent extras in a grand play. But the forgotten libraries beneath the earth have begun to correct this imbalance in the most dramatic way possible. They have given us back the voices of those who were never meant to be heard, the women, the enslaved, the poor, and the ordinary people who formed the very backbone of these civilizations. These are not the official decrees carved in stone for public admiration. They are the private letters, the legal petitions, the grocery lists, and the personal notes that were never intended for an audience beyond their immediate time. It is in this unedited, unvarnished paperwork that we find the true, complex texture of daily life, and it tells a story far more diverse and surprising than we ever imagined. Consider the remarkable evidence from the northern edge of the Roman Empire, at a remote fort called Vinderlander in what is now northern England. The waterlogged, oxygen-deprived soil there acted as a perfect preservative for hundreds of thin, postcard-sized wooden writing tablets. These were the text messages and sticky notes of the Roman world, and they are breathtaking in their intimacy. Among them, we find correspondence from women who were far from passive bystanders to history. In one of the most famous letters, Claudia Severa, the wife of the commander of a nearby fort, writes to her close friend Sulpicia Lepidina, the wife of Vinderlander's commander. She invites her to a birthday celebration, closing with a personal touch in her own handwriting. "I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul." This simple closing, a term of endearment between two women separated by 2,000 years, instantly shatters the cold, marble statue version of Rome. It reveals a world of female friendship, social networks, and domestic management that operated with sophistication and warmth, even in this harsh and distant military outpost. These women weren't just there. They were building community, maintaining social bonds, and managing the complex households that supported the Roman war machine. The picture becomes even more striking when we travel to the sun-baked villages of Roman Egypt, where the dry sands preserved a mountain of papyri that detail the legal and economic lives of ordinary people. Here, the documentation shows that women enjoyed a level of autonomy that would surprise many. They could own property in their own name, initiate divorce, and bring lawsuits to court. We have papyri recording loans made by women, contracts for the sale of land they owned, and even detailed wills where they dictate the distribution of their belongings. This isn't to say it was a society of modern equality. It certainly was not, but it reveals a legal framework that acknowledged women as active economic participants, not just the property of their fathers or husbands. A woman could be a vineyard owner, a merchant, or the head of a household, engaging in business and litigation with a recognized legal persona. These documents force us to abandon a monolithic view of the ancient world and instead appreciate the vast spectrum of legal rights and social roles that existed from one culture to another, and even within different layers of the same society. Beyond gender, these archives also cast a faint but crucial light on the lives of the enslaved, individuals who are almost completely invisible in the monumental record. The Linear B tablets from the Bronze Age palaces of Mycenaean Greece, for instance, are dry administrative lists, but within those lists we find the names of slaves, often with ethnic identifiers that hint at their origins from across the Aegean Sea, captured in war or through trade. They are listed as property, to be sure, but their inclusion in the palace's meticulous accounting shows they were integral to the economy, working as textile producers, cooks, and artisans. In Rome, legal documents on wax tablets found in places like Pompeii record the intricate process of manumission, the freeing of a slave, outlining the complex obligations that often continued between the former enslaved person and their patron. These aren't just records of oppression. They are evidence of individual lives navigating a brutal system, seeking freedom, and forging new identities within the constraints of their world. They give a name, a role, and a faint outline of a person where before there was only a silent statistic. The cumulative effect of recovering these myriad voices is nothing short of a historical revolution. We are no longer looking at a past populated only by philosophers in togas and emperors on thrones. We are now able to see the vibrant, messy, and dynamic societies they ruled. We meet the Egyptian soldier writing home to reassure his family about his safety and to ask after a missing package. We overhear the Roman merchant complaining about a delayed shipment of goods. We feel the anxiety of a Babylonian father arranging his daughter's marriage and the pride of a woman signing a business contract with her own seal. These fragments of lives, preserved by chance and recovered by science, accomplish something profound. They restore humanity to history. They remind us that the past was lived by people as complex and varied as we are, with their own hopes, fears, and daily struggles. By listening to these long silenced voices, we don't just add facts to a timeline, we build empathy across the centuries, constructing a far richer, more inclusive, and ultimately more truthful portrait of who we were, and by extension, who we are. We often get so caught up in deciphering the words of these ancient texts that we overlook a fundamental truth. These objects were meant to be seen, touched, and experienced, not just read. They are masterpieces of artistic expression, where the vessel of the message is as breathtaking as the message itself. To hold a medieval illuminated manuscript is to hold a small, portable cathedral of light and color. The pages, made of the most delicate vellum from calfskin, were painstakingly prepared to be a perfect, luminous white canvas. Upon this, scribes would lay down lines of text in a rich, black ink, but the true glory was reserved for the illuminators. These artists, working with pigments ground from precious stones like lapis lazuli for a brilliant, celestial blue or malachite for a vibrant green, would bring the pages to life. They didn't just illustrate the text, they elevated it. A capital letter at the beginning of a psalm might blossom into an intricate garden of vines and flowers, inhabited by tiny, whimsical creatures. A biblical scene in the margin wouldn't be a simple drawing. It would be a window into another world, rendered with such detail and emotion that it could teach the story to someone who couldn't even read the words. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a form of worship, a visual symphony intended to lift the reader's soul toward the divine and reflect the heavenly glory they were describing. This fusion of art and information is a universal human impulse, expressed in wildly different but equally stunning ways across cultures. In ancient Egypt, the act of writing was sacred, and the scribe's brush was a divine tool. Hieroglyphs were never meant to be merely functional. They were miniature works of art, each symbol carefully and beautifully rendered. The name of a pharaoh, enclosed within the protective oval of a cartouche, was a particularly potent piece of design. The symbols weren't just spelling his name, they were creating a powerful amulet, a magical loop that protected his identity and his soul for eternity. The Egyptians understood the power of visual symmetry and balance, arranging their signs to create a harmonious and aesthetically pleasing block of text that was as powerful to look at as it was to read. Centuries later and a continent away, Islamic calligraphers pursued a different kind of beauty rooted in the prohibition of figurative imagery in religious contexts. This limitation became the mother of incredible invention, pushing the art of writing to its absolute zenith. Using reed pens on paper, these artists transformed the Arabic alphabet into a flowing, rhythmic dance of line and space. The scripts could be bold and angular, expressing power and solidity, or impossibly delicate and fluid, resembling the tendrils of a vine or the breath of a prayer. In a Quran, the text itself becomes the image, a visual representation of the divine word's beauty and perfection, meant to inspire awe and reverence in the viewer even before a single word is understood. By studying these artistic choices, we gain a direct line into the technological sophistication and cultural values of these societies. The choice of materials alone speaks volumes. The use of ultra-expensive ultramarine blue in a European manuscript immediately tells you this was a commission for an incredibly wealthy patron, likely a king or a powerful bishop, because the lapis lazuli had to be mined in Afghanistan and transported across thousands of miles of treacherous trade routes. The development of iron gall ink, which changes color from a warm brown to a deep, permanent black as it oxidizes, shows a sophisticated understanding of chemistry. The intricate tooling on a leather binding, or the use of ivory plaques and precious metals for a cover, transforms a book from a simple container of information into a priceless treasure, a symbol of status and devotion. Furthermore, the artistic styles themselves reveal networks of cultural exchange that often go unrecorded in historical texts. You can see the influence of Byzantine art in Western illuminations, or the clear impact of Chinese painting techniques on the manuscripts found along the Silk Road in Dunhuang. The art is a language of its own, documenting the silent, peaceful trade of ideas and aesthetics that flowed alongside the more famous exchanges of goods and weapons. This profound dual identity as both a carrier of information and a standalone object of beauty is the ultimate argument for their meticulous preservation. We are not just saving words, we are saving a complete sensory experience. We are preserving the precise shade of red that an artist mixed 1,000 years ago to depict a martyr's blood, the exact pressure of the calligrapher's hand as they formed a letter, the gleam of gold leaf that was applied as an act of devotion. To lose the physical object is to lose the texture of history itself, the color and the craft that gives the cold facts their emotional weight and their human context. These ancient libraries offer us the rarest of gifts, the chance to not only know what our ancestors thought, but to see the world through their eyes, to appreciate the beauty they created, and to understand that for them, the truth was something that needed to be not only spoken, but also seen and felt. And so we reach the end of our journey into the depths, but it is not an ending at all, it is merely a pause, a moment to reflect on the breathtaking scale of what we've uncovered and the even greater mysteries that surely await. These forgotten libraries are far more than just hidden rooms filled with decaying paper and clay. They are the closest thing we have to true time machines. They are not simply collections of facts, but frozen moments of human consciousness, preserving the fears, the hopes, the jokes, and the prayers of people who, despite the vast gulf of centuries, were not so different from us. They worried about money, they fell in love, they argued about God, and they desperately wanted their stories to be remembered. In their decision to bury their most precious knowledge, they were sending a message in a bottle directly to the future, and against all odds, we have become the recipients. What these archives offer is nothing less than a second chance at history. For so long, our understanding of the ancient world was a one-sided conversation, dominated by the official proclamations of kings, the polished histories of the victorious, and the theologies of the orthodox. It was a story told by the loudest voices in the room, but these subterranean caches have given a microphone to the silenced. We now hear from the dissident, the mystic, the merchant, the soldier, and the homemaker. We get the unedited, unfiltered, raw data of human existence. This doesn't just add footnotes to the history books. It forces us to rip out entire chapters and reconsider the very narrative arc of human civilization. We learn that the past was not a simple, linear march of progress, but a messy, contentious, and wonderfully diverse tapestry of competing ideas, a reality far more interesting than any singular, clean story we might have preferred. The most exciting part of this entire endeavor is the undeniable truth that this story is still being written. The final chapter on these forgotten libraries has not been closed. In fact, we are likely only on the first few pages. Every single technological leap we make, every improvement in ground-penetrating radar, every new algorithm for deciphering faded ink, every innovation in virtual unwrapping, opens up new possibilities for discovery. The next great revelation might be lying in an unexcavated chamber beneath the sands of Egypt, sealed in a cave in the Hindu Kush yet to be scanned by LiDAR, or even waiting in a museum basement, a previously overlooked fragment that, when scanned with a new type of light, suddenly reveals a lost play by Sophocles or a gospel that changes everything we thought we knew. The Earth has kept its secrets well, but our tools for listening are getting better every day. This is why the work of preservation and public engagement is so critically important. It is a responsibility we all share. These discoveries are not the private property of academics or institutions. They are the shared inheritance of everyone. By supporting museums, by engaging with digital projects, by simply sharing these amazing stories, we become part of the effort to ensure that this dialogue with the past continues. We help guarantee that the next great discovery is met not with looting and loss, but with the care, respect, and wonder it deserves. We ensure that the voices from the dust continue to speak, not just to a select few, but to all of us, reminding us of our shared humanity and the unbroken thread of curiosity that connects us across the ages. So the next time you walk across an open field or gaze at a distant mountain, remember that history is not confined to textbooks. It is dynamic, it is fragile, and it is literally lying just beneath your feet, waiting for its moment to return to the light and tell its story. The quest to uncover these lost worlds is one of the greatest adventures of our time, and it is an adventure that is still very much underway. We hope you'll continue to explore it with us. Let us know which of these incredible finds fascinates you the most in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the mysteries of our